Astrid pressed her naked back against the cold stone wall of the storage chamber as young. Bjorn's calloused hands traced the curve of her waist, his breath hot against her neck, while the sound of his father's guests echoed through the long house above them. The thrall collar around her throat felt heavier than usual as she bit back the soft sounds threatening to escape her lips. Knowing that discovery would mean death for them both, his fingers tangled in her unbound hair, pulling her closer as he whispered desperate words against her skin about wanting her to be more than just a stolen moment in the shadows. The autumn thing of marriages had brought dozens of Jarls and their families to Bjorn's father's settlement, their longships crowding the shore like hungry sea wolves. For 3 days, Astrid had been kept hidden in the kitchens and storerooms, her fellow thralls warned repeatedly by the overseer Grim that she was not to be seen serving the noble guests. Her unusual pale green eyes and auburn hair, inherited from some long-forgotten Irish ancestor, had already caused too much trouble among the younger warriors. The Jarl's wife Ingrid had made it clear that no thrall should distract from the serious business of marriage negotiations between powerful families. Astrid had been born in chains, her mother Siobhan captured during a raid on the Irish coast 15 winters ago. She had no memory of freedom, only the daily routine of hauling water, scrubbing floors, and serving meals to the Jarl's household. Her hands were permanently stained from washing clothes and cleaning. Her back bore the scars of punishments for small infractions, and she had learned early to keep her eyes downcast and her voice silent. The thrall quarters behind the main longhouse housed 24 slaves, their thin bodies pressed together for warmth during the brutal Scandinavian winters. The settlement itself sprawled along a natural harbor, surrounded by dense pine forests that stretched endlessly toward the northern mountains. Wooden palisades protected the main hall, storage buildings and workshops where the Jarl's craftsmen created weapons, tools, and silver ornaments. The longhouse dominated the center of the compound, its carved dragon heads glaring down at anyone who approached, while smoke from multiple fire pits created a perpetual haze over the thatched roofs. Beyond the walls, the Jarl's farmlands extended toward rolling hills, where cattle and sheep grazed under the watchful eyes of free men and their families. Bjorn had noticed her months ago while she cleaned the great hall after the evening meals. But their first real conversation had happened during the Midsummer Festival when he found her weeping behind the mead hall. His younger brother Eric had died in a raiding expedition to the Frankish lands, and grief had made Bjorn reckless with drink and desperate for comfort. Instead of taking her by force as was his right, he had simply sat beside her and shared his pain. Speaking of how death followed their family like a persistent shadow, their secret meetings had begun that night, careful encounters in empty buildings or forest clearings where they could pretend, for brief moments, that the vast gulf between their stations did not exist. The sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs above made them freeze, their bodies tensing as they recognized the deliberate pace of Grim, the overseer, making his rounds. Bjorn pressed his hand over Astrid's mouth as they listened to the man checking the storage rooms, his iron keys jangling with each door he opened. The overseer had been suspicious lately, noticing small changes in Astrid's demeanor that betrayed her secret happiness. A thrall who smiled too often or whose eyes held too much hope was dangerous, threatening the careful order that kept the powerful in their positions and the powerless in their chains. The marriage negotiations taking place above them would determine the future of several noble bloodlines, with daughters and sons traded like valuable livestock to strengthen alliances and secure territories. Bjorn was expected to marry Solveig, daughter of Jarl Magnus from the northern fjords, a match that would bring her father's considerable fleet under their combined control. The girl was beautiful, well-trained in the arts expected of a noble wife, and came with a dowry that included silver, land, and the promise of future warriors. It was exactly the kind of strategic alliance that had kept Bjorn's family in power for 3 generations. Astrid knew she was nothing more than a pleasant distraction in Bjorn's life, a warm body to comfort him before he took his place as a proper Jarl with a proper wife. She had no illusions about love conquering the realities of Viking society, where bloodline and wealth determined every aspect of existence. Her own future held nothing but continued servitude until her body wore out from labor and she died unmourned in the Thrall quarters. The children she might bear would belong to her master, raised as slaves if they were lucky, killed if they were considered burdensome. The taste of ash and smoke from the longhouse fires mixed with the salt air blowing in from the harbor, reminding Astrid constantly of her place in this world. She had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated her master's moods, knowing when to make herself invisible and when her presence might be tolerated. The other thralls watched her with mixtures of envy and pity, recognizing that her unusual beauty would eventually bring either elevation or destruction. Grim's footsteps had moved away from their hiding place, but the danger remained constant. Bjorn pulled back to study her face in the dim light filtering through the wooden slats, his own features tight with the internal struggle she had seen growing stronger in recent weeks. His dark hair hung loose around his shoulders, and the silver arm rings marking his status caught what little illumination reached them. The sword at his side, inherited from his grandfather, represented everything that separated them: honor, wealth, the right to make choices about his own destiny. His blue eyes held an intensity that made her stomach flutter with dangerous hope, even as her rational mind warned her against believing in impossible dreams. The sound of raucous laughter from the great hall reminded them both that the marriage negotiations were proceeding according to plan, with ale flowing freely and bonds being forged between families who had raided together for generations. Soon, the formal announcements would be made, and Bjorn's engagement to Salvig would be sealed with gifts and oaths witnessed by all the assembled Jarls. Astrid felt tears threatening as she realized their stolen moments were numbered, counted down by the inexorable progression of political necessity and social expectation. The morning light revealed the true scope of the gathering as Astrid carried water buckets through the compound, her bare feet navigating the muddy pathways between buildings while trying to remain invisible among the servants bustling to prepare the day's first meal. The thing of marriages had drawn nearly 50 nobles from across the region, their retinues swelling the settlement's population to bursting point with warriors, servants, and hangers-on, all seeking advantage from the networking opportunities such gatherings provided. Temporary shelters had been erected beyond the main palisade to house the overflow, and the air buzzed with conversations in multiple dialects as different clans conducted their business. Inside the Great Hall, the formal ceremony was beginning with ancient rituals that had governed Viking society since time immemorial. Jarl Gunnar, Bjorn's father, stood at the high table wearing his finest cloak pinned with massive silver brooches, his graying beard braided with gold wire that caught the firelight from the central hearth. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of warfare and marked with the silver rings denoting his conquests, gestured broadly as he outlined the terms of his son's marriage to the assembled nobles. The price for Salvig's hand included not only treasure and land rights, but also mutual defense pacts and shared raiding seasons that would reshape the balance of power along the entire coast. Magnus Ironside, Salvig's father, proved to be as formidable as his reputation suggested, standing nearly 7 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and a presence that commanded immediate respect from even the most seasoned warriors. His daughter sat beside him in rich blue wool embroidered with silver thread, her golden hair elaborately braided and adorned with family heirlooms that spoke of generations of careful breeding and political maneuvering. Salvig's pale eyes surveyed the hall with calculating intelligence, clearly understanding her role in the game being played and accepting it with the resignation expected of well-bred Viking daughters. Astrid glimpsed these proceedings only in fragments as she moved through her duties. catching snatches of formal speeches and witnessing the careful rituals of gift exchange that would bind the families together in law and custom. The other thralls whispered among themselves about the wealth on display, from ornate weapons to intricately worked jewelry that represented the accumulated plunder of successful raiding careers. None of them dared comment on the irony that their own lives had been traded for far less valuable considerations. Their enslavement a footnote in similar negotiations that had taken place in different halls across their homeland. Grim, the overseer, intercepted Astrid as she attempted to return to the kitchens, his cruel smile revealing teeth yellowed by years of chewing bitter herbs to dull the constant pain in his joints. The man had been born free, but reduced to his current station through gambling debts and poor choices, making him particularly harsh toward those born into slavery. His grip on her arm was unnecessarily tight as he informed her that she would be cleaning the private chambers where Bjorn and his intended bride were meeting, for the first time away from public scrutiny. The assignment was clearly intended as punishment for some perceived transgression, though Astrid could not fathom what she might have done to deserve his attention. The chamber where Bjorn and Solveig were conducting their formal introduction occupied the most private section of the longhouse, furnished with the finest textiles and decorated with carved wooden panels depicting scenes from the great sagas. Astrid entered quietly with her cleaning supplies, hoping to complete her work quickly and escape before the young couple arrived. But fate conspired against her as their voices echoed from the corridor just as she began scrubbing the wooden floors. She pressed herself against the wall behind a large tapestry depicting Odin's ravens, hoping to remain unnoticed while they conducted their business. Solveig's voice carried clearly through the chamber as she spoke of her expectations regarding their future together, outlining her views on household management, the raising of children, and the political alliances their marriage would create or strengthen. Her tone was practical rather than romantic, discussing their union as the business arrangement it fundamentally was, though she expressed hope that respect and affection might develop between them over time. She spoke of her training in the domestic arts appropriate to a Jarl's wife, her ability to manage large households and multiple estates, and her understanding of the strategic thinking required to support her husband's ambitions. Bjorn's responses revealed his own internal struggle as he attempted to sound enthusiastic about their planned partnership while clearly wrestling with feelings that had nothing to do with political necessity. His voice held notes of strain as he acknowledged her many virtues and expressed appropriate gratitude for her family's willingness to ally with his. But Astrid could detect the underlying tension that came from a man being forced to abandon his heart's desire for duty's demands. He spoke of his plans for expanding their territorial control, his hopes for successful raid seasons, and his commitment to protecting the interests of both their families. The conversation shifted to more personal topics as Solveig inquired about his preferences regarding their future children, their living arrangements, and the various ceremonies that would mark their transition from betrothal to marriage. She demonstrated impressive knowledge of lineage and bloodlines, discussing potential genetic advantages and disadvantages, with the clinical precision of someone trained from childhood to think of reproduction in terms of strategic value. Her questions about his past romantic experiences were direct but practical, accepting that young men of his status would naturally have experimented with serving women and thralls before settling into married life. Astrid felt her heart constrict as Bjorn assured his intended bride that his previous entanglements were meaningless diversions that would end completely once their marriage was formalized. His words, though clearly intended to reassure Solveig, struck Astrid like physical blows as she realized the full extent of her self-deception regarding their relationship's significance. She had allowed herself to imagine that their meetings meant something more than simple physical release for a young man with limited outlets for his desires, But his casual dismissal of their connection revealed the vast gulf that truly separated their worlds. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor alerted Astrid that others were coming to join the conversation, likely family members or advisors seeking to formalize various aspects of the marriage agreement. She attempted to gather her cleaning supplies and retreat before being discovered, but her movements disturbed a bronze cup that rolled across the floor with a sound that echoed through the chamber like a bell tolling. Both Bjorn and Solveig turned toward the source of the noise, their expressions shifting from surprise to curiosity as they spotted the thrall attempting to make herself invisible behind the tapestry. Bjorn's face went through a series of complex emotions as he recognized Astrid crouched among the cleaning supplies. Her distinctive hair and green eyes, impossible to mistake even in the dim light filtering through the chamber's high windows. His sharp intake of breath was audible enough that Solveig followed his gaze, her intelligent eyes taking in the scene and drawing conclusions that made her expression harden with understanding. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever as all three young people grasped the implications of this accidental revelation, each recognizing that the careful political arrangements being negotiated had suddenly become infinitely more complicated by the intrusion of genuine, human emotion into what was meant to be a purely strategic alliance. Solveig's reaction proved far more sophisticated than either Bjorn or Astrid had anticipated, her political training allowing her to assess the situation with calculating precision rather than emotional outburst. She studied Astrid with the same careful attention she might give to evaluating a potential threat or opportunity, taking in details of appearance, bearing, and the subtle signs that revealed the depth of feeling between the thrall and her intended husband. Her pale eyes missed nothing as she noted the way Bjorn's breath quickened in Astrid's presence, the protective stance he unconsciously adopted, and the guilty flush that crept up his neck as he realized his secret had been exposed. Rather than creating an immediate scene, Solveig dismissed Astrid with a gesture that combined authority with strategic calculation, her voice remaining level as she instructed the thrall to complete her duties elsewhere and speak of this encounter to no one. The command carried implications beyond simple discretion, suggesting that Solveig understood the potential consequences of allowing such information to reach the wrong ears during delicate marriage negotiations. Her ability to maintain composure in the face of discovering her future husband's emotional attachment to his slave demonstrated exactly why her family had produced successful political leaders for multiple generations. Astrid fled the chamber with her heart pounding, fully aware that she had just become a dangerous complication in arrangements that involved significant wealth and political power. She sought refuge in the stable complex where the visiting nobles' horses were housed, finding temporary sanctuary among the warm animal bodies and familiar smells of hay and leather that reminded her of simpler times. The horses paid no attention to her emotional turmoil, their steady breathing and occasional soft nickering providing a stark contrast to the churning anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The remainder of the day passed in a haze of routine duties performed with mechanical precision while Astrid's mind raced through the possible consequences of her discovery. She carried water, scrubbed cooking pots, and assisted with food preparation while listening to fragments of conversation that revealed how the marriage negotiations were proceeding toward their inevitable conclusion. The other thralls noticed her distraction, but attributed it to the general stress that affected all servants during large gatherings, when the slightest mistake could result in severe punishment from masters already strained by the demands of hospitality and political maneuvering. Evening brought the formal announcement of Bjorn and Solveig's engagement, accompanied by the ritual exchange of gifts that would bind their families together in law and custom. Astrid was required to serve at the celebration feast, carrying platters of roasted meat and flagons of mead while maintaining the invisible presence expected of slaves during important ceremonies. She witnessed Bjorn accepting congratulations from dozens of warriors and Jarls. His smile fixed in place, but never quite reaching his eyes as he played his required role in the political theater surrounding them. The engagement gifts revealed the true scope of the alliance being forged, with Magnus presenting a magnificent sword that had belonged to his grandfather. Its blade inscribed with runes promising victory in battle, and its hilt decorated with silver wire worked into intricate patterns. Jarl Gunnar reciprocated with a golden arm ring of exceptional craftsmanship and a promise of shared raiding seasons that would allow both families to expand their territorial control along the contested coastlines where Frankish settlements offered tempting targets for organized Viking expeditions. Solveig herself received a collection of jewelry and textiles that would serve as the foundation of her household's wealth, along with legal documents establishing her rights to specific properties and a percentage of future raid profits. The formality of these exchanges emphasized the business-like nature of Viking marriages among the nobility, where personal feelings were subordinate to strategic considerations that might affect the survival and prosperity of entire extended family networks. The bride and groom were expected to develop appropriate affection for each other over time, but their primary obligation was to their respective clans rather than to their own hearts. As the celebration continued into the night, Astrid caught glimpses of private conversations between various family members and advisors who were working out the detailed logistics of combining two powerful household organizations. Questions of which servants would transfer between establishments, how raiding profits would be divided, and which territories would fall under whose jurisdiction required careful negotiation to prevent future conflicts. The complexity of these arrangements demonstrated why marriages among the Viking elite required months of preparation and the involvement of multiple generations of family members. During a brief moment, when the attention of the hall was focused on a skald recounting the heroic deeds of Solveig's ancestors, Bjorn managed to catch Astrid's eye from across the crowded room. The anguish in his expression was carefully hidden from the other guests, but clearly visible to someone who had learned to read the subtle signs of his emotional state through months of secret meetings. His slight nod toward the rear entrance indicated his desire to speak with her privately, though both of them understood the enormous risks involved in any communication during such a politically sensitive gathering. Astrid waited until the serving duties required her to venture outside for additional supplies before slipping away from the other thralls and making her way to the small storage building where they had often met in secret. The autumn air carried the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat from the celebration, along with the sharper scent of the sea that reminded her constantly of her island origins and the circumstances that had brought her to this foreign land. The sounds of laughter and conversation from the longhouse seemed to mock her situation, emphasizing how completely she existed outside the world of political significance and social recognition. Bjorn appeared within minutes, moving with the careful stealth he had developed during their previous clandestine encounters, but his usual confidence was replaced by visible tension and uncertainty. His hair was disheveled from the formal feast, and he carried with him the lingering aromas of mead and celebration that marked his participation in ceremonies that would determine his future path. His hands shook slightly as he reached for her, betraying the emotional strain of maintaining appropriate behavior while knowing their relationship was approaching its inevitable end. Their conversation was conducted in whispers, punctuated by long silences, as they both struggled with the reality that discovery by Solveig had made their situation exponentially more dangerous. Bjorn spoke of his obligations to his family and clan, the impossibility of defying centuries of tradition and political necessity for the sake of feelings that could never be publicly acknowledged. His words were heavy with genuine regret, but they also carried the resignation of someone who had always known this moment would eventually arrive and had simply chosen to ignore its approach for as long as possible. Astrid found herself trapped between anger at his weakness and understanding of his impossible position, recognizing that no amount of genuine feeling could overcome the vast social and economic forces that governed their respective destinies. Her own future remained as bleak as ever, with the additional burden of knowing that someone she had come to love would soon belong completely to another woman who represented everything she could never hope to become. The weight of her thrall collar felt heavier than ever as she contemplated returning to a life of pure servitude, after experiencing even a brief taste of being valued for something beyond her labor. The 3 days following Bjorn's formal engagement brought unexpected complications that transformed Astrid's situation from merely heartbreaking to genuinely dangerous. Beginning with Solveig's calculated decision to request the Thrall's permanent assignment to her personal service. The request, presented as a gracious gesture toward incorporating local servants into her new household, actually represented a sophisticated form of psychological warfare that demonstrated the future. Jarl's wife possessed far more cunning than her composed exterior suggested. Solveig's pale eyes held unmistakable intelligence as she explained to Jarl Gunnar that she preferred to train her servants personally rather than inherit unknown quantities from her new family's existing staff. Grim the Overseer delivered the news with barely concealed satisfaction, informing Astrid that her new duties would include maintaining Solveig's private chambers, assisting with her elaborate grooming routines, and accompanying the noble lady during her daily activities throughout the settlement. The assignment effectively placed Astrid under constant surveillance while forcing her to witness every aspect of the relationship developing between Bjorn and his intended bride, a form of psychological torture that revealed Solveig's sophisticated understanding of human nature and strategic thinking about potential threats to her marriage. The first morning of her new assignment brought revelations about Solveig's true character that forced Astrid to reconsider her assumptions about the noble lady's motivations and capabilities, while helping prepare the elaborate braided hairstyles required by her station. Astrid discovered that Solveig possessed extensive knowledge about the settlement's inhabitants, including detailed information about several serving women who had caught the intention of various warriors and the potential complications such relationships might create for carefully planned political alliances. Solveig's conversation during these intimate grooming sessions revealed a young woman who had been trained from childhood to analyze human behavior and identify potential threats to her family's interests. Skills that made her particularly dangerous to anyone who might disrupt her carefully laid plans. She spoke casually about other marriages where inconvenient romantic attachments had been eliminated through strategic relocations, sudden deaths, or arranged marriages that removed tempting distractions from the reach of powerful men. Her tone remained conversational and almost friendly, but the underlying message was unmistakable. The revelation that changed everything came during the 4th day of Astrid's new assignment, when she accidentally discovered a private conversation between Solveig and her personal guard, a massive warrior named Ulf, whose loyalty to Magnus Ironside's family had been purchased through years of generous treatment and promises of future advancement. The conversation, conducted in hushed tones in Solveig's private chamber, revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond simple marriage negotiations and into the realm of calculated political manipulation that could reshape the balance of power among several rival clans. Solveig's true plans involved not only securing her marriage to Bjorn, but also gradually eliminating his family's independence through a series of carefully orchestrated events that would leave her father Magnus as the dominant power in the region. The marriage was merely the first step in a longer campaign that included plans to remove Jarl Gunnar through arranged accidents, position Bjorn as a puppet ruler under Magnus's influence, and consolidate control over the combined territories through strategic use of debt, intimidation, and selective violence against potential rivals. The conspiracy required perfect timing and absolute secrecy, with various family members and allies positioned to execute specific aspects of the plan once Solveig was safely established in Bjorn's household. Ulf's role involved recruiting sympathetic warriors from Gunnar's own guard, men whose loyalty could be purchased or compromised through carefully applied pressure on their families and personal weaknesses. The conversation revealed that several key figures in the settlement were already under Magnus's influence, creating a network of traitors hidden among Gunnar's most trusted advisors. Astrid's accidental discovery of this conspiracy placed her in a position of impossible responsibility, holding information that could save Bjorn's family, but possessing no means of credibly communicating such devastating news to people who would never believe the word of a thrall against that of a noble lady. Her slave status meant that any accusations she made would be dismissed as lies or delusions, while the attempt to reveal the conspiracy would certainly result in her immediate execution for spreading false rumors about her social superiors. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her throughout the following days as she continued her assigned duties while watching the conspiracy unfold around her with gathering momentum. Small incidents that she had previously attributed to chance or coincidence now revealed themselves as carefully orchestrated elements of Solveig's campaign to weaken Gunnar's position and create opportunities for future manipulation. The sudden illness that had struck the Jarl's chief advisor, the mysterious fire that had damaged the settlement's primary grain storage, and the string of accidents that had befallen several of Gunnar's most loyal warriors were all revealed as deliberate acts of sabotage. Bjorn's behavior during this period showed increasing signs of strain as he struggled to fulfill his obligations to his family while dealing with private doubts about his approaching marriage that he could never articulate publicly. His interactions with Astrid became limited to brief glances and subtle gestures that conveyed volumes about his internal conflict, but offered no solutions to their impossible situation. She could see him wrestling with suspicions about recent events in the settlement, but his political inexperience prevented him from recognizing the patterns that were becoming clear to someone observing from her unique position. The tension reached a breaking point during a private feast celebrating the approaching conclusion of the marriage negotiations when Solveig made a seemingly casual comment about the various accidents and misfortunes that had recently befallen the settlement. Her words were carefully chosen to plant seeds of suspicion about potential enemies, while simultaneously offering her family's assistance in investigating and preventing future incidents. The manipulation was so subtle that even Astrid, who knew the truth, could barely detect the calculated nature of Solveig's performance. As the evening progressed, Astrid found herself serving wine to the very people who were actively betraying their host while maintaining expressions of loyalty and friendship that made her stomach turn with revulsion. The cognitive dissonance of participating in this elaborate deception while possessing knowledge that could expose it created an almost unbearable psychological pressure that left her feeling physically ill and emotionally shattered. The weight of her thrall collar had never felt heavier as she contemplated the impossibility of her position and the inevitability of the tragedy she could see approaching but could do nothing to prevent. The evening concluded with Magnus and Gunnar finalizing the last details of the marriage agreement, their voices heavy with satisfaction as they contemplated the strengthened alliance their children's union would create. Neither man suspected that they were actually participating in the opening moves of a campaign that would ultimately destroy one family while elevating the other to unprecedented regional dominance. Solveig smiled as she accepted her future father-in-law's blessing contained layers of meaning that only Astrid could fully comprehend, making her the sole witness to one of the most sophisticated political manipulations she had ever encountered. The conspiracy reached its first major milestone when Jarl Gunnar collapsed during the morning meal, exactly 1 week before the scheduled wedding ceremony. His powerful frame convulsing violently before he fell unconscious beside the high table where he had been discussing final preparations for his son's marriage. The symptoms appeared consistent with sudden illness, but Astrid recognized them as the effects of a slow-acting poison that Solveig had been carefully administering through specially prepared mead served exclusively to the Jarl during their private family gatherings. Chaos erupted throughout the settlement as warriors rushed to assist their fallen leader, while various advisors debated the appropriate responses to what appeared to be either divine displeasure or enemy action against their clan. The timing could not have been worse. With dozens of foreign nobles still present for the wedding celebrations and the entire political structure of the region hanging in balance pending the outcome of Gunnar's condition, Bjorn found himself thrust into a leadership role he was not prepared for, forced to make critical decisions while dealing with his personal anguish over his father's mysterious collapse. The settlement's healers worked frantically to identify the cause of Gunnar's condition, trying various remedies and consulting ancient texts that described similar symptoms from past cases of suspected poisoning. Their efforts were systematically undermined by Solveig's helpful suggestions about alternative treatments that actually prolonged the Jarl's suffering while ensuring the poison continued its inexorable work toward his eventual death. Her performance as a concerned future daughter-in-law was flawless, complete with tears and offers to bring her family's own healers to assist with the crises. Astrid watched this elaborate deception unfold with growing desperation, knowing that Gunnar's death would trigger the next phase of Magnus's campaign to control the combined territories while leaving Bjorn vulnerable to manipulation and eventual elimination. The marriage ceremony would proceed as planned despite the crisis, binding the families together legally before anyone could investigate the suspicious circumstances surrounding the Jarl's illness. Once Solveig was officially established as Bjorn's wife, her position would become unassailable, even if future evidence revealed her role in the conspiracy. The attempt to warn Bjorn came during the second night of his father's illness, when Astrid managed to intercept him during a brief moment when he escaped the constant stream of visitors and advisors seeking his attention. The conversation took place in the same storage building where they had previously met. But the atmosphere was completely different, as desperation replaced their former romantic tension. Astrid's words tumbled out in urgent whispers as she revealed everything she had discovered about Solveig's conspiracy, the planned elimination of his family, and the systematic poisoning that was slowly killing his father. Bjorn's initial reaction was complete disbelief, his political training making it impossible for him to accept that a marriage alliance could disguise such an elaborate betrayal of hospitality and honor. The accusation struck at the foundation of everything he had been taught about the sacred bonds between warrior families and the mutual respect that governed relationships among the Viking nobility. His refusal to credit Astrid's warning was compounded by the impossible source of the information, as accepting her word would require acknowledging that a Thrall possessed better intelligence about political conspiracies than the Jarl's own advisors and family members. The confrontation escalated as Astrid's desperate attempts to convince him were met with increasing anger and accusations that she was motivated by jealousy rather than genuine concern for his welfare. Bjorn's emotional state, already strained by his father's condition and the pressure of sudden leadership responsibilities, made him particularly vulnerable to the suggestion that a woman he had used for comfort was now trying to manipulate him through elaborate lies designed to disrupt his marriage and damage his family's political alliances. The argument reached its climax when Bjorn accused Astrid of forgetting her place and attempting to meddle in affairs far beyond her understanding or station, his words revealing the vast social gulf that had always existed between them despite their intimate moments. The rejection was brutal in its completeness, destroying not only her hopes of saving his family, but also any remaining illusions she might have harbored about the true nature of their relationship. His final command for her to return to her duties and never approach him again with such nonsense was delivered with the cold authority of a master addressing a disobedient slave. Astrid's return to the main longhouse coincided with the arrival of Magnus's personal healer, a withered old woman whose reputation for wisdom masked her actual role as a specialist in undetectable poisons and subtle assassination techniques. The crone's examination of Gunnar's condition was conducted with great ceremony and apparent expertise. But Astrid recognized the performance as elaborate theater designed to provide credible cover for the Jarl's murder while positioning Magnus's family as helpful allies rather than hostile conspirators. The healer's diagnosis confirmed the worst fears of everyone present, declaring that Gunnar had been stricken by a supernatural curse that could only be lifted through specific rituals requiring rare ingredients and considerable time to perform. Effectively, the prognosis suggested that the Jarl might survive if the proper ceremonies were conducted, but his recovery would be slow and uncertain, leaving the question of leadership unresolved during a critical period when the settlement faced potential threats from rival clans who might view the crisis as an opportunity for territorial expansion. The wedding preparations continued despite the emergency, with Solveig arguing persuasively that postponing the ceremony would signal weakness to their enemies and potentially destabilize the entire region during an already dangerous period. Her logic was unassailable from a political standpoint, making it impossible for anyone to oppose her suggestions without appearing to abandon their obligations to the broader clan alliance that the marriage represented. The trap was closing with inexorable precision as all the elements of Magnus's conspiracy moved toward their predetermined conclusion. The night before the scheduled wedding brought the final revelation that shattered any remaining hope for preventing the catastrophe. When Astrid discovered Ulf distributing silver to several of Gunnar's guards in exchange for their promise to support Magnus's authority, once the marriage was completed and the transition of power became necessary, the corruption extended deeper into the settlement's hierarchy than she had imagined, with men she had considered loyal members of the household revealing themselves as traitors who had been carefully recruited through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and appeals to their personal ambitions. The scope of the betrayal was staggering in its completeness, encompassing not only the immediate household, but also key figures in the settlement's military structure, trade relationships, and extended family networks. Magnus had spent years preparing for this moment, identifying and compromising individuals whose positions would allow them to facilitate his takeover, while eliminating potential sources of resistance to his expanding authority. The marriage was merely the culminating event in a campaign that had been years in the making. Astrid's final night as a thrall in Gunnar's household was spent in sleepless anguish as she contemplated the approaching disaster and her complete powerlessness to prevent it. The weight of her knowledge felt like a physical burden as she listened to the sounds of wedding preparations echoing through the settlement, knowing that each hammer blow and shouted instruction brought them closer to a tragedy that would reshape the political landscape of the entire region. Her thrall collar had never felt heavier as she faced the reality that tomorrow would witness not only Bjorn's marriage, but also the beginning of his family's destruction at the hands of people they trusted as honored guests and allies. The wedding morning dawned gray and cold with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, an ominous portent that the settlement skald interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure with recent events. Though his muttered warnings were dismissed by celebrants already committed to proceeding with ceremonies that had consumed months of preparation and enormous resources. Astrid rose before dawn to begin her assigned duties, helping prepare Solveig for the elaborate rituals that would transform her from a visiting noble into the settlement's new lady. her hands steady despite the churning anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The bride's preparation involved ancient ceremonies that had been passed down through generations of Viking women, including ritual baths with specially scented oils, the application of intricate henna patterns to her hands and arms, and the careful arrangement of her hair in the complex braided style that signified her transition from maiden to wife. Solveig submitted to these ministrations with regal composure, her pale eyes holding depths of satisfaction as she contemplated the successful completion of her family's elaborate conspiracy and her own elevation to a position of unprecedented regional power. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of wedding guests arrived from distant settlements, their long ships crowding the harbor while their crews established temporary camps along the shoreline under banners, displaying the heraldic symbols of dozens of different clans. The gathering represented the largest concentration of Viking nobility in the region's recent history, with Jarls and their retinues traveling for days to witness an alliance that promised to reshape the political landscape for generations. The irony that they were actually attending the opening ceremony of Magnus's campaign for territorial dominance was lost on everyone except Astrid, whose unique position as Solveig's servant had provided her with insights unavailable to the settlement's official leadership. The ceremony itself began with traditional invocations to the gods, particularly Freya and Freyr, whose blessings were considered essential for ensuring the fertility and prosperity of the new union. The settlement's chief priest, an elderly man whose authority derived from decades of successful rituals and accurate prophecies, conducted the ceremonies with elaborate attention to detail that reflected the enormous political significance of this particular marriage. Sacred fires were lit using ancient techniques. Ceremonial weapons were blessed with oils and incantations, and offerings of precious metals and livestock were made to ensure divine favor for the proceedings. Bjorn appeared for his wedding, dressed in his finest clothing and armor, the silver arm rings marking his status polished to brilliant shine, and his father's ceremonial sword prominent at his side. But Astrid could detect signs of strain in his bearing that spoke of sleepless nights and internal conflict about the path his life was taking. His eyes sought hers briefly during the processional, and she saw in them a desperate question that she could not answer without revealing knowledge that would certainly result in her death. The moment passed quickly, as the formal ceremonies demanded his complete attention. But the exchange left her feeling even more isolated in her terrible awareness of the conspiracy unfolding around them. Solveig's entrance was choreographed to maximize the impression of wealth and power that her family brought to the alliance, with her elaborate wedding dress incorporating rare silks and precious metals that demonstrated Magnus's successful raiding career and extensive trade relationships. The golden crown that marked her status as a Jarl's daughter caught the firelight as she moved through the ceremonial space, while her attendants scattered flower petals and sang traditional songs celebrating the union of two great bloodlines. Her performance was flawless, conveying exactly the right combination of maiden modesty and noble confidence that the assembled guests expected. From a bride of her station, the formal exchange of vows followed ancient patterns that emphasized the political and economic aspects of Viking marriage rather than romantic sentiment, with both bride and groom acknowledging their obligations to their respective families and the broader clan, alliances that their union would create or strengthen. Bjorn's voice remained steady as he recited the traditional promises, but Astrid could hear the underlying tension that marked a man fulfilling duty rather than following his heart. Solveig's responses were clear and confident, betraying no hint of the deception that would soon transform their marriage from a strategic alliance into an instrument of conquest and betrayal. The gift exchange that followed revealed the true scope of the resources being committed to this alliance, with Magnus presenting Bjorn with a magnificent war axe whose blade had been inscribed with runes promising victory in battle and whose handle was wrapped with silver wire worked into intricate patterns. The weapon represented not only enormous monetary value, but also symbolic authority that would establish Bjorn's credibility as a war leader, capable of commanding respect from experienced warriors. Jarl Gunnar's reciprocal gift, presented despite his weakened condition, included property deeds and trading rights that would significantly expand Magnus's economic influence throughout the region. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony brought together hundreds of guests, representing every significant family in the regional power structure. Their conversations creating a complex web of alliance negotiations, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts that would govern political relationships for years to come. Astrid moved through the celebration, serving food and drink while maintaining the invisible presence expected of thralls during important gatherings. But her awareness of the conspiracy made every conversation feel like a performance staged to conceal darker purposes beneath the surface of political cooperation. As the evening progressed, she witnessed Magnus and his closest advisors conducting discreet conversations with various family heads. Their discussions clearly intended to establish the groundwork for future political arrangements that assumed Gunnar's eventual death and Bjorn's need for experienced guidance in managing his inherited responsibilities. The negotiations were conducted with such subtlety that the participants themselves might not fully understand how they were being positioned for Magnus's benefit. But Astrid's unique knowledge allowed her to recognize the systematic manner in which potential sources of resistance to his authority were being neutralized through carefully crafted agreements and mutual obligations. The night's darkest moment came when she overheard Solveig quietly instructing Ulf about the final phase of their conspiracy, which would involve the elimination of Bjorn himself once his usefulness as a figurehead had been exhausted, and Magnus was ready to claim direct control over the combined territories. The conversation revealed that even the marriage was merely a temporary expedient designed to provide legal cover for the gradual absorption of Gunnar's holdings into Magnus's expanding domain. Bjorn's wife intended to become his widow within a matter of months, positioning herself to inherit his wealth while remaining available for remarriage to another of her father's allies if strategic considerations made such an arrangement advantageous. The revelation that Bjorn himself was marked for death transformed Astrid's desperate situation into something approaching despair, as she realized that her knowledge was the only thing standing between him and assassination, while her slave status made it impossible for her to credibly warn him or anyone else who might take action to prevent the tragedy. The wedding celebrations continued around her with increasing intensity as the night wore on, but she felt completely isolated from the joy and political optimism that animated the other participants. Her thrall collar felt heavier than ever as she contemplated the approaching catastrophe and her complete powerlessness to prevent it, despite possessing information that could save lives and preserve the political stability of the entire region. The crisis erupted 3 days after the wedding, when Astrid's desperate decision to act, despite the enormous personal risk, finally overcame her paralyzing awareness of her powerless position in Viking society. The opportunity came during the pre-dawn hours when she discovered Solveig's personal cache of poison hidden among her cosmetics and grooming supplies. The small vials containing enough concentrated toxin to eliminate several more potential obstacles to Magnus's expanding control over regional politics. The discovery provided the physical evidence needed to support her accusations. But approaching anyone in authority still required overcoming centuries of social conditioning that made a thrall's testimony inherently worthless against that of nobility. Her choice to approach Eric the Skald reflected a calculated assessment of the settlement's power structure and her desperate need to find someone whose position might allow them to act on information provided by a slave without immediately dismissing it as lies or delusion. The aging poet held a unique place in Viking society. his role as keeper of oral traditions and witness to heroic deeds, giving him authority that transcended normal social hierarchies, while his advanced years and reputation for wisdom made him one of the few people who might listen to accusations that would normally result in immediate execution for the person making them. The confrontation with Eric took place in his private quarters, a small chamber decorated with carved wooden tablets bearing fragments of the great sagas and illuminated manuscripts that recorded the genealogies and heroic deeds of multiple family lines. The old man listened to Astrid's revelations with increasing alarm as she detailed the systematic poisoning of Jarl Gunnar, the conspiracy to eliminate his entire bloodline, and the physical evidence she had discovered proving Salvik's involvement in what amounted to an elaborate campaign of political assassination disguised as marriage alliance. Eric's response revealed both his understanding of the enormous implications of her accusations and his awareness that acting on such information would require careful strategy to avoid triggering a regional war between powerful families whose mutual destruction would benefit nobody except their common enemies. The Skuld's position as neutral observer and keeper of clan histories gave him access to information about Magnus's past behavior that supported Astrid's claims, including patterns of suspicious deaths and convenient accidents that had eliminated political rivals throughout his career. The plan they developed together reflected both the limitations imposed by Astrid's slave status and the political realities that governed relationships between powerful Viking families, requiring careful orchestration to expose the conspiracy without triggering immediate retaliation that could destroy innocent people caught in the crossfire. Jarl's role involved using his privileged position to conduct discreet investigations that would provide additional evidence while Astrid continued her assigned duties serving Salvik, now with the specific mission of documenting further proof of the conspiracy's scope and timing. The gathering storm broke when Eric's investigations revealed that Gunnar's condition was indeed the result of systematic poisoning. But the Jarl's constitution was strong enough that immediate treatment with the proper antidotes might still save his life if the conspiracy could be exposed before Magnus felt secure enough to accelerate his timeline for elimination. The race against time intensified as they realized that Salvik's confidence in her position as Bjorn's wife was making her increasingly careless about concealing evidence of her family's true intentions. The confrontation came during the evening meal when Eric stood before the assembled household and guests to make his accusations public, his voice carrying the authority of his position as he detailed the evidence of systematic poisoning and political conspiracy that threatened not only Gunnar's family, but the stability of the entire regional alliance system. The revelation created immediate chaos as various family representatives demanded proof, while others called for immediate action against what appeared to be an elaborate campaign of assassination disguised as legitimate political maneuvering. Salvik's response demonstrated the sophisticated training that had prepared her for exactly this type of crisis. Her immediate counterattack focusing on discrediting the source of the accusations by revealing that they originated with a Thrall whose motives were obviously corrupted by jealousy and romantic delusion. Her performance was masterful, combining righteous indignation with calculated appeals to social prejudice that made it difficult for anyone to credit testimony that violated fundamental assumptions about the reliability of slave versus noble perspectives on complex political matters. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental weaknesses in Viking society's information-gathering systems, as the assembly struggled to evaluate competing narratives that both seemed plausible but led to completely different conclusions about the nature of recent events and appropriate responses to the crisis. Magnus's reputation for political cunning actually worked against his daughter's defense, as several of the assembled Jarls recalled suspicious circumstances surrounding previous alliance negotiations that had benefited his family at the expense of their former partners. The tide turned when Bjorn himself demanded to examine the physical evidence, that Eric and Astrid had gathered. His growing suspicion about recent events finally overcoming his initial disbelief about his wife's involvement in a conspiracy against his family. The poison vials discovered among Solveig's belongings provided tangible proof that supported the accusations, while additional evidence about the systematic corruption of his father's guard revealed the scope of Magnus's preparation for his takeover attempt. The final confrontation between Bjorn and Solveig stripped away all pretense as she abandoned her performance of innocent outrage and revealed the calculating intelligence that had driven her family's campaign for regional dominance. Her admission that the marriage had been merely a tactical expedient designed to provide legal cover for the gradual elimination of his bloodline transformed the political crisis into a personal betrayal that demanded immediate response, according to the honor codes that governed Viking society. The violence that erupted as various family representatives chose sides in the rapidly escalating conflict demonstrated the fragility of the alliance system that governed regional politics, with carefully constructed relationships dissolving instantly as underlying tensions and unset. Competing ambitions emerged from beneath the veneer of cooperative diplomacy. Swords were drawn throughout the Great Hall as warriors aligned themselves with different factions, their loyalties determined by complex calculations involving family honor, personal advantage, and long-standing grudges that had been temporarily suppressed for political convenience. The battle was brief but brutal, with the confined space of the Longhouse limiting tactical options, while the presence of multiple family representatives ensured that the conflict would have far-reaching political consequences regardless of its immediate outcome. Magnus's conspiracy had included positioning his supporters strategically throughout the hall, but his careful planning had not anticipated the possibility that his daughter's cover would be blown so completely that neutral parties would be forced to choose sides based on evidence rather than predetermined loyalties. The climax came when Bjorn confronted Solveig directly, their personal combat representing not only the resolution of their individual conflict, but also the broader struggle between different approaches to political power and territorial control that had been building for years beneath the surface of regional diplomacy. The fight was as much symbolic as physical, with the outcome determining whether Magnus's sophisticated conspiracy would succeed in reshaping the political landscape, or whether traditional alliance systems would survive to maintain the existing balance of power among competing Viking clans. The aftermath of Solveig's death at Bjorn's hands left the Great Hall scattered with bodies and stained with blood that would take weeks to completely scrub from the wooden floors and carved pillars that had witnessed generations of political negotiations conducted in more civilized circumstances. The battle had claimed lives from multiple families, ensuring that the consequences would extend far beyond the immediate participants and reshape regional politics for generations, through blood feuds and alliance shifts that no single leader could control or predict. Magnus himself had fallen during the fighting, his elaborate conspiracy dying with him, along with several key supporters whose deaths left power vacuums that ambitious rivals were already maneuvering to fill. Bjorn stood amid the carnage wearing his father's sword and bearing fresh scars that marked his violent transition from political pawn to regional leader, his face bearing the hollow expression of someone who had discovered the true cost of power and the price of trusting in arranged marriages that disguised elaborate betrayals. The young Jarl's first actions involved securing his father's recovery through proper medical treatment that reversed the effects of the slow-acting poison, but Gunnar's health would never fully return to its former strength, leaving his son to bear primary responsibility for the family's survival and the settlement's defense against future threats. The political ramifications spread throughout the region as news of Magnus's failed conspiracy reached other families who had been positioning themselves for various roles in his projected expansion of territorial control. Their careful calculations suddenly rendered worthless by the violent collapse of schemes that had seemed certain to succeed. Several minor jarls who had committed resources to supporting Magnus found themselves dangerously exposed to retaliation from rivals who now understood the scope of the treachery that had been planned against the existing order. Astrid's role in exposing the conspiracy earned her immediate freedom from thrall status. But her elevation to the position of free woman came with complications that neither she nor her liberators had fully anticipated when the dramatic events were unfolding in the Great Hall. Her detailed knowledge of political intrigue and demonstrated ability to gather intelligence made her valuable to Bjorn's household. But her romantic history with the new Jarl created social complications that threatened to undermine his authority among warriors who expected their leaders to maintain appropriate relationships with women of suitable status. The solution they eventually developed reflected the complex realities of Viking society's treatment of former slaves and the practical necessities of governing a settlement that faced multiple external threats in the wake of Magnus's failed takeover attempt. Astrid accepted the position of household administrator, a role that utilized her organizational skills and political insights while maintaining sufficient social distance to avoid scandalizing traditionalists who might otherwise challenge Bjorn's leadership decisions based on personal rather than political considerations. The months following the conspiracy's exposure brought a steady stream of visitors seeking to renegotiate their relationships with Gunnar's family, their approaches ranging from offers of alliance and mutual support to barely concealed threats about the consequences of disrupting established political arrangements through violent confrontations that had eliminated important regional power brokers. Bjorn's handling of these diplomatic challenges revealed growing sophistication in his understanding of the complex calculations that governed inter-family relationships and the delicate balance between strength and flexibility required for successful regional leadership. Astrid's new position allowed her to observe these negotiations from a unique perspective. Her experience serving in both Magnus's conspiracy and Bjorn's household providing insights into the motivations and methods that drove political maneuvering among the Viking elite. Her reports and analysis became increasingly important to the family's decision-making process. Though her contributions were always credited to official advisors to maintain appropriate appearances regarding the sources of strategic intelligence and policy recommendations, the settlement itself gradually recovered from the disruption of the failed conspiracy. But the experience left permanent changes in the way political relationships were conducted, and security measures were implemented to prevent future infiltration by hostile agents. The guard system was completely reorganized with new loyalty verification procedures. Alliance negotiations were subjected to additional scrutiny and safeguards, and the household staff underwent careful review to identify and eliminate potential sources of internal threat. Eric the Skald composed a saga commemorating the events that had saved the settlement from destruction. His verses carefully crafted to preserve accurate historical details while presenting them in the heroic framework that Viking audiences expected from tales of political intrigue and violent resolution. The poem's circulation throughout the region helped establish Bjorn's reputation as a leader capable of decisive action when faced with existential threats to his family's survival, while also serving as a warning to other would-be conspirators about the potential consequences of attempting similar deceptions. Gunnar's gradual recovery allowed him to resume some of his former responsibilities, but the experience of near-death and betrayal by trusted allies left him more cautious about political commitments and more dependent on his son's judgment regarding alliance negotiations and territorial disputes. The transition of authority within the family proceeded smoothly, despite the traumatic circumstances that had accelerated its timing, with father and son developing an effective partnership that combined experience with energy in their approach to regional leadership challenges. The question of Bjorn's remarriage remained unresolved as the first anniversary of Solvik's death approached, with various families proposing alliances through marriage that would strengthen their mutual defensive capabilities while avoiding the catastrophic vulnerabilities that had nearly destroyed his bloodline. The negotiations were conducted with unprecedented attention to verification and safeguards, reflecting lessons learned about the dangers of trusting appearances over carefully investigated reality when evaluating potential political partners. Astrid's own future remained deliberately uncertain as she focused on consolidating her position within the household and developing the administrative skills that had made her indispensable to the settlements. Successful governance during its recovery from crises. Her relationship with Bjorn had evolved into something resembling deep friendship and mutual respect. But the social barriers that had always separated them remained largely intact despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together in opposition to common enemies. The final image that dominated the settlement's collective memory was of the Great Hall, restored to its former glory but bearing subtle scars from the violence that had nearly destroyed everything its inhabitants had spent generations building, a reminder that political survival in the Viking world required constant vigilance against threats that often came disguised as opportunities for advancement and prosperity. The carved pillars still bore traces of bloodstains that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove, serving as permanent testimony to the price of freedom and the cost of trusting too easily in the promises of ambitious strangers who sought power through deception rather than honest competition.